My pleasure to invite Jon Cicirelli to come and talk about getting animals back home. Welcome, Jon.
Just a quick endorsement for Betsy's presentation. My own organization has used the survey, the UNC survey she spoke about on the volunteer program assessment. I highly recommend it. It's pretty thorough, and not only does it give you an assessment, but then they're willing to talk to you about that assessment, and you can get on a conference call with them, and they'll sort of tell you, well, what does this mean, and what are things you can do to try and improve in certain areas. And I'll put in a second plug, the same organization does a shelter diagnostic program. Also in coordination with HSUS, they developed a shelter diagnostics. So they'll evaluate your entire program, not just your volunteer program. The volunteer one's a separate piece. The shelter diagnostic, they'll look at your field operations, your shelter operations, and they'll look at your medical operations. And they could even customize it a little bit if there's certain information. Now that one does cost a bit of money, but particularly if you're a large organization, it's well worth it. It's not expensive when you consider all the work and effort that's involved in it. We've actually done that one twice, and we'll do it again in the future because then you're able to compare yourself and see, okay, we did this a couple years ago, how have we improved in certain areas? And in both cases, they're able to give you comparative data because they've done enough surveys. They'll sort of show you how you compare to the average responses that are out there on all the other organizations that they've done the surveys with. So they'll sort of give you a sense of where you fall on the curve of success, if you will, and where you might have some weaknesses. So I highly recommend using those if you're interested in evaluating your organization more. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a subject that we're all engaged in, which is lost and found animals. It's a lot of why we're here, right? We get a lot of lost animals in our facilities, and we're trying to at least ultimately figure out how to get them back home. These are not uncommon stories that you might see. I'm sure you hear them here in Australia as well. We see them with some frequency in the States. You know, it's usually it's a microchip that's the cause, but some animal is found thousands of miles, or in this case, 1,750 miles is probably about 300 kilometers, or 3,000 kilometers, I'd say. So you get a sense of how far away this dog traveled in just 2 months. I would suggest this little guy did not do this on his own. So he was probably found by somebody else who thought he was pretty cute and kept him, and probably my guess is the reason he got out in the first place was because he was a wanderer, and the reason he got out in the second place is because he's a wanderer. But thankfully he was found the second time by a Humane Society who was able to scan him and find the microchip. So microchips are great, but if you track this information at all in your organization, you'll find that not a lot of dogs and cats have microchips in them, and even many of the ones who do often lead to dead ends because people don't keep their information up to date, unfortunately. So that makes life difficult. But of the ones who do have up-to-date information and have microchips in them, they have a very high success rate of being returned to their owner, believe it or not. In California, I mentioned in one of the other talks I did, this big study we did about a variety of things. One of the things we were really looking at were reclaim rates of animals. One of the laws that had passed had extended the holding period from basically 3 days to 5 days. And the whole reason for extending it was because it was based on a belief that if you gave the animals more time and you gave people more time, then more animals would be returned home. Turns out that's not that true, actually. When you start looking at the data, the vast majority of animals, if they're found in an animal shelter, are found in just the first few days, usually in those first 3 days. It's not that animals aren't found days later, or even weeks later in some cases, but the huge percentage of them are really found very quickly. The people who find them are very motivated typically. But here's what we found. This is data we've been sort of talking about in a variety of ways through this whole week, but dogs about a 20% reclaim rate, cats about a 2% reclaim rate by owners. So, you know, there's always variation by locality. You know, we've certainly seen much better results than this, and we've seen worse results than this at certain organizations. Cats in particular have a hard time at a 2% reclaim rate. You know, there's a lot of research that's been done, much like Betsy's presentation before me. I'm going to breeze through a lot of stuff that actually has a lot more depth to it than I'm going to be able to do in the little time I have. but I am going to tell you where there's a lot of great information to get more into the differences in behaviors of cats and dogs when they're lost. And they're pretty substantial. This is one of two of my cats. His name is Bullwinkle. I've got two of these guys that are both tabbies, although the other one's an orange tabby. He escaped about a year ago. He was gone for about a week, and the reason he got loose is because I also have one of these. And he tends to leave the door ajar, and he did in this case, and my cat took off, unfortunately. He was always an inside cat. He's never allowed outside, neither of them are. So I was very, very concerned for him. It took me a week to find him, but I did find him, thankfully. And so the differences in what they do are pretty substantial. And in my case, what helped me was a flyer, and I was going around the neighborhood and looking for him, but I was also putting up flyers with my phone number. I even had a ransom for him with all the kids in the neighborhood. Anybody who could find him would get a nice, crisp $20 bill, which inspired them quite a bit. But it was an old lady who was not very far at all from my house who found him. He was hunkered down in a bush right behind her patio, and she saw him and started feeding him, and then noticed on her mailbox, we're in a condominium or townhome complex, so it's not single-family homes, so everybody has to sort of go to the same area to get their mail. And so she saw his picture and said, "Oh my goodness, that's him." And so I was lucky. He has a microchip in him, of course, but she wouldn't know that and had no way to figure that out. And the information is up to date. So dogs and cats are a bit different. Cats really don't run very far away, and dogs sometimes will, actually. They just want to take off. It's not for any particular reason other than their nose is telling them something's interesting out there in the world, and I want to know about it. Cats have very definite territories, whether they're an indoor-outdoor cat or they're an indoor-only cat. If you're an indoor-only cat, your territory is the house. So once you're outside, you're no longer in your territory. But dogs, on the other hand, even though they might have their own backyard or their own area where they feel that's home, they can either be scared into leaving or just be interested in leaving, particularly hounds. And here's a great scent dog, a beagle. Love to just put their nose down and go. And a lot of that's related to their own biology, right? A cat, they're both carnivores, they're both predators, or at least they're related to those animals before they were domesticated. Wolves, in the case of dogs, when you look at their hunting behavior and their normal behavior, they cover vast expanses of territory. They go and go and go. Even when they are chasing prey, they'll often chase them for long, long periods of time. Cats are very different. Cats, if they're not successful at hunt, they're not going to chase an animal for very long at all if it gets far enough away from them. Even a cheetah that's really fast will only expend so much time and energy before it just gives up and tries again. A cat is more of an ambush predator. It's an opportunist. It's going to see something and try to pounce on it and grab it. A dog can smell something from quite a distance away and go looking for it. And that's a base partly for why they behave differently when they do. Of course, I don't know how often you guys do fireworks here in Australia, but in my area in particular, we have two major events that have a lot of fireworks. We have the 4th of July, which is American Independence Day, and we have the New Year's Day, or New Year's Eve, I should say. We also have a third, almost as serious one, because we have a large Asian population, which is Chinese New Year. The Lunar New Year always occasions a lot of, it's more firecrackers though than it is fireworks. They don't typically shoot the big ones that blow up in the sky, but they just light these long, long, long strings of firecrackers that can go for minutes and minutes and minutes. But at any rate, those scare a lot of animals. The busiest day in an American shelter is July the 5th, the day after the 4th of July, because so many dogs and cats have been scared. Usually it's the dogs that are the issue in the shelter. They've been scared out of the yard. Even out of their house, we've seen dogs jump through windows, being scared of fireworks. So loud booms and thunderstorms can certainly scare them as well. Cats can run into any kind of problem, if they're out in their yard, whether that's another dog or a wild animal or another cat chasing them off, or a person. So there's a variety of reasons they may be scared. But again, they're not going to run very far. They're going to run and then they're going to hide. And that's what cats like to do. They like to protect themselves. If they get hurt, and I think I mentioned this in one of my presentations, You know, cats aren't going to wander very far. They're just going to crawl under something and stay there. And so they might be injured or sick and do that. They might, in fact, be dead, and that's why you can't find them, because they're not going to come back. They can be scared by some of the very same things that dogs, of course, can be scared by. Cats also have a tendency to be rescued. You know, we've been talking a lot about cats at this conference, and sometimes people just in the neighborhood, they see a cat, they're a little worried about it, they bring it in, it turns out the cat lives in that neighborhood. Didn't need to go there at all. I think you've seen in some of the presentations that, in fact, a cat is much more likely to return home if it's left where it is than if it's brought to an animal shelter, right? So, and it's, in fact, many times of a factor greater. Because in most cases, cats are not outside of their general neighborhood. It's a fairly rare circumstance. Not impossible, but fairly rare circumstance. So, in particular with cats, when you start studying and looking at cats that have been found, you can see both indoor cats, which is the lighter blue one, and then the outdoor cats, which is the lighter brown one. The vast majority of them are found very, very close to home. They just do not go very far in most cases. And then you can see there's smaller percentages that show up distances that are further away. In my case, my cat was a little more than 5 houses away. I'd say probably more like 10, but very close by. When the lady called, we literally walked over to her house in less than 5 minutes to pick him up. So cats are going to generally, going and looking for them in the shelter often isn't going to be your first or best case strategy. Here's an interesting thing. So when you look at cats, the behavior of indoor cats versus outdoor cats is also different to some degree. So in this case, if you look, you can see again that lighter blue piece of the pie with the 24%, and then the light brown one with the 25%. So roughly 50% of cats that are indoor cats that have been lost they either return home or they're found very near their home. So half of them right off the bat, they're either coming back or you're going to find them very close by. And then you look at that other nice chunk, that 23%, you can trap them. And a lot of that's because you actually have a little bit better success rate trapping indoor-only cats when they escape because, first of all, they don't go very far, but second of all, they're just less confident being outside. So that they're not able to procure food. They don't know where there's other places to get food, so they're a bit more motivated to go inside a trap. And that last little blue section is using posters, which is what worked for me. So outdoor cats, you can see, exhibit somewhat different behavior. A full third of them will just return on their own, big surprise. And then another 13% you can see there in the lighter brown, which is much less than the indoor cats, are found if you're just going to walk around in their area. But you can see a much smaller percent are found using the humane traps, and a larger percent are found using posters. And I would suggest the reason why is because they're really just not that lost. You're just letting people know you're looking for them, right? You don't know where they are, but they know where they are. And I had another cat that used to do this. Many years ago, I did have an indoor-outdoor cat, and I lived across the street for years from these neighbors. And one day I was out, my cat was in the front yard, and I was petting her, and we were talking, and the neighbor comes by and she says, "Is that your cat?" And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "I've been feeding that cat for 2 years." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, I didn't know anybody owned the cat. She lived across the street from me, so my cat had been cheating on me this whole time with the neighbor." And she knew what she was up to. She, get up there and bat her pretty little eyes. She was a wonderfully cute little long hair, but she'd make her little meows, and she'd get all kinds of great treats from this lady. So she knew what she was up to. And I think sometimes cats probably just take a break from you, right? They're just, I'm going to stay over here for a few days. The weather's good. Somebody's feeding me over here, and I'll make it back there when I make it back there. And I think that's why posters can be more successful, I should say, with an indoor-outdoor cat, because they're much more familiar with what's going on. And with dogs, their behavior, and this is particularly probably well known for those of you who work and try to catch dogs, there's really 3 main flavors of behavior they have. The first is they're pretty friendly, right? You pull up and you just be nice to them, and you speak in a high voice, or you have a treat or whatever, and they just come right up, their butts wiggling, they're ready to go. They'll hop right in the car with you or the truck. No real problems at all. Then the in-between stage ones, they're a little shy, they're not sure what you're up to, they're a little suspicious because they don't quite know you. They're not entirely terrified of you, but they may take some time and effort to convince that you're on the up and up and you're trying to help or you're friendly. So it may take some time and effort to gain their trust. And then some dogs are just straight up afraid for their life. And in particular, these can be dogs that have really never been off their property, and then something happened that they did get off their property. You know, maybe the chain broke or the gate broke or something finally happened to scare them enough, like a thunderstorm, and they jumped a fence. And now they find themselves in totally unfamiliar environment. Maybe they're not as well socialized. They can even be difficult for their own owner to catch. Or to coax to come in. I've seen this myself when I was an officer where we've had owners and the dog's loose and the dog doesn't want to come to them either. Now sometimes they're just messing around with you too, right? I mean, we've seen that. They just want to goof off and the owner just doesn't really have good control over them and they're not coming back for a while. But those dogs can be difficult to capture, whether you're a professional or not. You know, if a dog doesn't want to be caught, it can be very difficult to catch them, even if you have all the other tools. And one of the organizations I'll talk about in a little bit has a neat concept where they actually use dogs to catch dogs. And it works. Cats are kind of follow the same spectrum. The difference is it's a little bit easier to trap a cat. But generally speaking, you know, you can tell a friendly cat, the tail will be nice and straight up and they'll come up to you and they're wanting attention. Turns out with my guy, when he got lost, that was it. He was scared, but he's always been a friendly cat. He's the kind of cat, if someone walks in the house, he'll come and greet. His brother, won't do that. He'll sort of sit at the top of the stairs and watch for a little while till he's sure he feels okay with what's going on, and then he'll come down. But my guy, the one who escaped, was pretty friendly, and that's why the lady was able to engage him and realize, oh, this is somebody's cat. And then connected it to the lost flyer that I'd put out. But with cats, it's typically a little easier to trap them. I mean, dog traps tend to be very large. They're not easy to use. I don't even know how many of you use them. In my agency, we really only use dog traps in extreme circumstances because it's such a pain to work with and use. There are different kinds of traps. There is also tranquilizing, which is difficult. We used to do that at an agency I was in Southern California. We'd do that more frequently. But that's a high-impact thing for an animal, particularly one that's very frightened. And if you've never tranquilized an animal before, shooting a dart at them, it's nothing like what they show you on TV. You know, they show you on TV a lion or something that they're going to put a collar on or test, and they shoot him, and then in the next scene they're all sitting next to him, doing whatever work they're doing on him. That animal did not go to sleep that fast, I guarantee you. You know, as soon as you hit that animal, it starts running. It doesn't fall asleep immediately. And in some cases, its own adrenaline can overpower some of the effects of the drug. So not recommended except in extreme cases or where you have a really serious public safety matter that you've got to try to address because the danger to the animal is pretty high, largely because they're going to run. Excuse me. So really there's two partners in this whole relationship when people are trying to find animals. There's us and there's the people looking for the animal. And the shelter plays a very big role in this. And I think we can do a good job as long as we're informed and then can pass that information on to the owner, because really the owner is the key individual in this. But first of all, we've got to do our piece. And a big piece of that is taking a good picture. You can see the difference between these two pictures, but I can't tell you how many times I see the one on your left that looks like that. I mean, you wouldn't be able to identify that cat anywhere. You wouldn't know that was your cat for sure. I mean, we have people walk into our animal shelter. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but we have them looking for their cat. It happens to be a black cat, and they'll stare at every black cat like, I'm not sure if that's my cat or not. Because they all kind of look, you're just looking at them like, well, I don't know. So a good picture is really paramount, nice and clear. You should be managing your lost and found files, whether you're doing that on paper or online or however you're trying to do it. This is a great job. Betsy was talking about volunteer jobs. It's a great job for a volunteer. It's a high reward kind of job because when you make that match, you really feel like you've made a difference and you did it. And just having someone go through those each day and just look at who's reporting lost and who's reporting found, and then cross-check those, of course, against the animals that are in the facility, and see what matches you can find. And then there's all kinds of places to post them: Craigslist, newspapers, there's a variety of places where you can post lost animals out to the rest of the world for people who are looking for them. But remember, you're the expert here. You know, a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about here, most people out there aren't going to know. Most people know two basic things. Maybe check the shelter and put up a flyer. That's kind of what they know. Some people walk around the neighborhood and sort of call out the animal's name, or maybe they'll try to talk to the neighbors. But in a minute, we'll tell you how they have to do a bit more than that, really. Course doing online and allowing people to have access to your facility on a daily basis, ideally, so that they can look for their pets is very good. And then I mentioned the posting. How you organize your lost and found files is important too. You know, organizing them by things like breed or date found or date lost really aren't too helpful, because the same day an animal got loose is oftentimes not the same day it was found. And so those dates aren't really going to coincide. Breeds can be a little bit unreliable because sometimes people don't even know what breed their animal is, and in your shelter you may describe it differently than they would describe their own pet. But if you can look at generalizations like the postcode where the animal is picked up, the probability, especially with a cat, is that it's from that postcode. Now with a dog it may wander beyond that, but people are going to realize, well, that's the next one over, and so on and so forth. And this is found to be a fairly successful model as a way to organize those reports. And then if you are ending up euthanizing stray dogs and cats, you know, give them one more shot before it's time to euthanize, and check again just to see if any new information has shown up. You certainly don't want to miss that if someone's looking for them. And then to the extent that you can, connecting with HOAs, I don't know if you know what those are. In our country we have what are called homeowners associations. So these typically are associations of groups of neighborhoods. So say a developer comes in and builds a neighborhood of 500 homes, single-family homes. They'll have an association of all those homes. They share information, or maybe they pay a small fee to make sure the playground's kept up, or the sidewalks are swept, or something's painted, or benches are replaced, or trees are trimmed, or common area lawns are mowed. Or in my case, so I live in a condominium or a townhome, so in my case, we also pay for things like we have a pool that we all share, or we have the trash. We all collectively pay for the trash to be taken every week. So I'm sure you have those kind of associations. You just may call them something different, but those are great places to connect about these things. Certainly the paperhood, but another thing that's shown up lately in the United States is a website called Nextdoor, and it's basically just meant for neighbors to share information of all kinds, including that they've lost their pet, but also to say things like, oh, well, we're going to have this event next weekend, or somebody's house got broken into over here, make sure you're locking your doors, or whatever news there is that's really specific to your neighborhood. And we're trying to ink a deal with them where we can start automatically posting. If an animal comes up from that zip code or postcode, that we can automatically just post right on their site and say, this animal was found right near your neighborhood or right in your neighborhood. If anybody knows anything about it, come down to the shelter and find it. I believe you do have something like this. When I was up in Cairns last week, I thought I saw a commercial. I think they called it Neighborhood or Neighbor or something like that. But I believe so. What's that? Was it a neighborhood watch? Yeah. I'm not sure if it was that or not. This is different from a neighborhood watch, although in our police department, one of our deputy chiefs was telling me recently that this Nextdoor is starting to take the place of neighborhood watch in our areas, because it's more of a social networking. It's very limited to a neighborhood, but it kind of provides the same sort of service. And he was telling us how the neighborhood watch reports, they seem to be going down because people are reporting them on these Nextdoor sites instead, which is fine as long as people know where to find the information, of course. Other things that you can do as an animal shelter, when you do return an animal to their owner, make sure they got a chip in them, make sure they have a tag or a collar on them before they're leaving again, because particularly with dogs, if they've demonstrated once that they're willing to escape, then they're probably going to try again. It was one of the common things, interesting, that I learned when I was an officer. I would have these people, they'd be like, the dog escaped, and you would be talking to him about it, they'd say, I've had that dog for 5 years and he's never once escaped. And then a few weeks later he would escape again and again. And it was like the dog had learned, holy moly, I didn't realize there was this whole world out there, and now I don't want to stay in the backyard anymore. And up until then, their whole world had, the fence and the wall and the house, and they didn't realize that they could just sort of do it on their own. And once they figured it out, it was hard to stop them. And then, of course, if you work trying to in this business, you realize some breeds are more likely to escape than others as well. Doing free or sponsored events to put tags and chips on dogs and cats is a great idea. This is something you can often fundraise on, or you can get grants to do, and try to put more information on the animals so that you have a better shot at reconnecting them. And then I found a very interesting program in Miami. They have a pet detective club, and these are volunteers, another good volunteer opportunity potentially. These are volunteers who really study up on all this stuff I'm talking about here and more in depth than I'm going to talk about here. And so they sort of know all the tricks of the trade, and then they're able to not only counsel people, but they can actually go out and help them with their search or help them figure out what to do based on sort of getting information about what's happened and how long it's been and what the animal's like and things like that. And so, of course, the owner has a role in all of this. They are the most important person in the search because in most cases, other people aren't going to be looking for your pet for you. And so it's important that we're able to give them the information and the tools to keep trying. If they're not finding it in the shelter, there's a lot more they can do than just put up a flyer, and they have to be persistent about it because what happens typically is they sort of fall into believing certain myths about the lost pet, and they really just don't keep looking. They think, well, the cat ran away, they always run away. Or, it got killed by a coyote, or out here dingoes. Or that the cat just went away to die, and so they're not going to bother trying to look for him. Or that someone stole him. And now all these things are possible, they're just not the most probable things that are going on. Or, I already walked around and put up a few flyers and I talked to the neighbors. And the interesting thing about that is, particularly with cats, because cats don't go far, it's not enough to ask your neighbor, hey, can you look in your backyard? What you should be asking your neighbor is, can I look in your backyard? Let me look under your porch. Let me look behind the corner or the shed, or if you have a wood pile or whatever. Because the cat's likely to be hiding, and realistically, how likely is your neighbor to crawl up under their deck and look for your cat, right? So if you really want the search done well, you really got to try to engage your neighbors in the close vicinity of your own home to be able to look closely for where the animal might be, not just ask the neighbor. And so these are this is one of the great ones. This is the Missing Pet Partnership. They haven't been around that long, I'd say a decade or so, I don't know. But these folks have just done so much great research. This is where a lot of this information comes from about the different behaviors animals exhibit when they're lost and the different tactics you have to use to try to look for them. And not only does it break it down between cats and dogs or indoor cats and outdoor cats, but it also breaks it down by the personality of your dog or cat. So if you have a very friendly dog or you have a very unsocial dog, there's different techniques to how you're going to go about looking for or recapturing them. So there's a lot of layers that are involved in this, but they're very effective. They're very useful. And their big philosophy is think lost, not stray, when these animals are in the shelter. And I think there's reason to maybe cut that a little bit when it comes to cats, because we've talked a lot about the fact that not all cats are owned. But when it comes to dogs, in most cases, dogs have had a relationship with a human being. And so in most cases, dogs are lost. Now, sometimes people just don't want to look for them because they're done with them. But in many cases, the dog is disconnected from a human being. And so they truly are lost. And they have this 5 + 5 + 55 rule. I haven't been able to figure out the 55 other than to think they're talking about the speed at which people are driving, which would be 55 miles an hour, which is 90 kilometers an hour, I think, here. But I know what the 5 + 5 means. And the 5 + 5 is, at a typical intersection where you're going to put a sign, you basically have 5 seconds to convey your message, so you really should only use 5 words or less to do it. And so you really want big words that convey a message. Reward, lost dog, 3 words. Gray tabby, blue collar, 4 words. Big letters so people can put an image in their head. And then, of course, to the degree you can, you want them to have a good, clear image of their pet. Not everybody has the best, photograph of their pet, but hopefully some people do. And in many cases, I think they do. And then, one of the things that they counsel against too is don't just go with the regular standard size piece of paper, the 8.5 by 11. You really want to go, you can use that like they did on the top one there where it's green, but then put a big poster around it so it stands out. Because again, people in many cases are just kind of whizzing by, or they're just stopped at a light and they kind of glance over and see it on a pole. You're not going to be able to read what's on that little lettering, but you can read white poodle and know, well, somebody's looking for a white poodle, and it puts it in their mind to keep their mind out. So those are all tips that they have. And then lastly, I want to promo this new technology, and I do believe it is here in Australia already, and I'm hoping that you folks are going to encourage everyone to use it. It's super simple. It uses face recognition to identify dogs and cats. It's 99% accurate. It's a fascinating bit of science. It works just as well basically as it does on human beings. It's a free app that you can download. You basically just take a nice face picture of your pet. You align its eyes and nose so that it sort of creates this little triangle. It takes you all of 3 seconds to do it, and then you upload it, and it will compare that against its entire database, which is growing rapidly. They have a major effort going on to really sign up a lot of animal shelters, not only for the stray animals that are in them, but also for the animals that we're adopting out, so that people are just doing this immediately. The great thing about this, though, is it broadens your search. So, for instance, let's say in your neighborhood, a few people are using this app in your area, and you've lost your pet. You put an alert out for your neighborhood, and all the people that are using that app will get an alert for your animal that look in this area. If you see an animal that looks like this, all you got to do is let the app know that you found it, and it connects you. And so the shelter doesn't have to be the only one helping this person. And the great thing about it is, in our day and age, of course, everybody's got a cell phone like this, but also, people, for better or for worse, don't want to spend a lot of effort. And this makes it really easy. You don't have to spend a lot of effort, frankly. It's literally just take a picture and send it in. And they've got a few other really cool applications that are coming out about it, but it's able to, and I've already seen its success in animal shelters where it's matched animals to an animal that's inside an animal shelter. And it's not any more difficult for your staff really to use either. If your staff is already taking pictures of animals on intake, which they should be, it's really not any significantly different to use. So I highly recommend it, that you promo it. The great part about it, like I said, is that it's free to everybody. It's free to the shelters to cooperate and use with the organization, and it's free to any individual to download. I know the founder of the company, the two co-founders. I've been out with them a few times, and that's their commitment, is to keep it that way. They'll make money off it by, putting little ad banners and stuff on it. Purina or somebody can give them money to sponsor things, but they're never going to charge the user. One of the co-founders themselves had lost their own dog, and if you ever hear him talk, he'll tell you that story and how traumatic it was for his family to have their own family member disappear, and how hard they searched and looked for that dog, and they did find her. And that was part of his motivation for doing this. So just wanted to plug for them that it's a great app. And so here's some others that have great information. I'm sorry, Betsy, I'm sure HSUS does too. But the ASPCA Professionals is a great one for shelters. It's a lot of information that's really geared for shelter professionals. And of course, Pet Finder, which I'm sure many of you probably use already, is also in the lost and found business. So thank you very much.
Maybe Betsy and Sarah. There she is. Betsy, Sarah, Betsy. Just about to share a panel. Fantastic. Oh, that covered a lot of ground. All quite diverse as well. So I expect we're going to get some interesting questions coming up.
A question for Sarah. The vast majority of the people that I deal with are semi-owners and have semi-owned cats. And I've found that if you offer desexing, they'll keep the cats and let me de-sex them and they'll take responsibility for them. So I had a couple of two-part question for you. Did you get any information in your study around whether there's a price sensitivity, or ask them about whether they'd be willing to de-sex them if they weren't, and whether they'd pay for it or whether it had to be free?
In a very non-scientific manner, in the sense that I interviewed a lot of these people myself, and so we'd have a bit of a chat when I'd finished asking them the questions. So it wasn't data that I'm actually going to report in the papers because it wasn't recorded in that way. But what I would say is that most people would be willing to do it, and certainly they would be willing to do it if it was a choice between that and taking the cat into a shelter where they knew it was going to be killed. So we had, quite a lot of discussions about that with those people. I think with regards to price, a lot of the ones that I spoke to were really committed semi-owners, and so they weren't really too worried. But I think your average person who just cares for a cat which they consider to be stray probably doesn't really want to spend very much money on it. So I think if it was up to me, I would be getting organisations, charities, whatever, to be actually organising free desexing or very low cost desexing, and even going to get the cats, because that's where you find that even when you offer free desexing but expect people to bring them in, they don't do it.
That's certainly been my experience,
Yeah.
that we need to take
Make
the
it
cat
easy
away and
for
do
them.
it.
Yeah.
The second part of the question was with regard to your clear support for the return, neuter and return.
Yes.
Were you talking only about semi-owned in that regard, and if so, or would you propose to trap and return them without their permission, or are you talking about getting their engagement in that process?
Well, I suppose because we are in a situation at the moment where it's not legal here to do this kind of thing, is that I think we need to take a bit of a softly approach, in the sense that if we've got semi-owners we know that the cat has a carer, that carer is willing to continue caring for the cat but is not going to support the cat being killed, and I wouldn't suggest that that's the best outcome for anyone anyway, is why don't we start with them? I don't really feel that I know enough about the feral cat issue, because that's not my area of research to get into that. I have opinions, but I don't want to espouse them because I don't have the data to back it up. But I think it's pretty much a win-win solution to at least start addressing this semi-cat ownership issue, because these cats have carers, they care enough about them to look after them, we can desex them, and that at least stops them from having kittens. Yes, exactly. And these are urban cats. They're in an environment that's already altered beyond anything natural. So, our main people who are going to disagree with us are people who care about wildlife. And I'll just put it out there, I care about wildlife too. And that's why I said it's not a choice between no cats or cats. The cats are there. And there's a heap of owned cats who are there as well, also killing wildlife. So let's just try and be realistic and deal with it the way that we know will actually start to work. And like John was saying, was it Wednesday, I think? Yeah, one day. We actually have evidence of success, and so why don't we build on that here? But we're not doing that here because the legislation doesn't allow us to, but I think that needs to change.
To fight the legislation. Okay. Over here.
That just follows on from what I want to say actually about rethinking our approach to cat management. And I don't want to set a cat amongst the pigeons.
Oh, very good.
But my question is actually for any of the major welfare orgs and shelters and government officials here today. What plans do you have to put TNR and non-lethal programs on the table here in Australia?
Okay, well, perhaps we just need to... Is that a rhetorical question or a real question? A real question. So here we have... sorry, I'm not sure who that is with the microphone. Yeah. So are you ready to run? Because lots of welfare associations represented here. What's your answer?
I'll chime in real quick on that. One of the things, I've asked a few people to send me the legislation about releasing pests, because I'd like to look at it more. I'm very involved in legislation in California. I'm the coordinator for our state association, so every year, we go through all these bills. And frequently there are loopholes and things like this in the way the language is written. I understand, at least from what I've heard about the overall law, is that it was really written for pest management, and largely about wild animals and not so much about cats. But I realize that this is the way it's interpreted. But one of the questions I've asked and I've not yet found a good answer to is, okay, well, what if you did do it? Who's going to enforce it? Who's out there watching and doing and making anybody follow that law? And I was astounded, by the way, to find out that you have these vast herds of camels and buffalo and, of course, the frog that's out
Cane
here.
toads,
And, I mean, just
yeah.
all
Cane
these
toad.
different animals, right? Yet cats seem to be the one that people are so worried about. But I would suggest that maybe if there's a bold person out there, and I'm not going to try to put anybody on this spot, but somebody ought to just start doing it and see what somebody else tries to do about it to stop them. Because realistically, I don't think anybody's going to stop you. In particular, if you do it and start getting results, because you're going to be able to demonstrate that, wait a minute, we're actually making things better off. And ultimately, are you truly releasing an animal in the environment because it was already there to begin with? All you did was spay and neuter it. You didn't add to the equation, you're subtracting from the equation, because now that animal can't make more. It's a little hard for me to think that this law was meant to prevent some prevention like that. I get that the law is meant to say, hey, you can't just take a bunch of cats and start throwing them out there into the world. Sure, that makes sense. Or any other non-native species. But a cat that's already there and is already an issue, and you're simply trying to stop a cycle, that to me is a different kind of concept.
And you're absolutely correct, because there are several organisations, which I will not name, but many people know them, who do precisely that. Especially in the ones I know are in Sydney, and they trap, neuter and return very successfully, and no one stops them. The only time they ever have any problems is when a body corporate complains, or someone in a apartment situation complains about the cats below because their feeders come and feed them. But if they are desexed, trapped, neutered and returned, very little gets done.
Okay.
And I know many participating vets that help do it. So you're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Today, Naga put in an application with a law firm to start the research on the different interpretations of the word abandonment, to see if we can go in sideways and actually start the legislation or start removing that part of the legislation.
Fantastic. Yes, nice work.
I think it's a great idea. And, I have a very simple anecdote I like to use, and I've told some of you it, but think about this when it comes to abandonment. So you're doing a TNR program. You pick up a cat, you spay and neuter it, and you put it back. And the question is that abandonment? And what I like to compare it to is, think you're sitting there one evening, it's a cold, rainy night, like perhaps tonight will be, and a cat shows up at your back door. It's not your cat, you've never seen it before, but it's there meowing. You let it in, you give it a little food, it curls up on the couch, it sleeps for the night. Next morning comes, the sun's up, cat's by the door, ready to go out. You open the door and let him out with no intention of ever seeing him or feeding him again. Did you just abandon that cat? I think not. So why is it so different that just because you picked it up for a few hours, took a few parts away, maybe gave it a few shots and a microchip, and then put it back, how is that abandonment? So I just put that out there for you.
I'm sure that your lawyer would love to speak to John. You're happy about that, aren't you, John? Yeah, sure. Okay, lady down here. Thank you.
John, have you struck any issues with, say, someone said, oh yeah, I semi-own that cat, and you've taken the cat off and you've desexed it, and it's, I don't know, died under anaesthetic, something's gone wrong, and then it turned out, well, it wasn't that person's cat in the first place to give the authority for that cat to be desexed. It was, you know, maybe it really belonged to somebody else, but it was kind of that person believed that they kind of semi-owned it. So have you had any of those issues?
I just want to be clear what you're asking. So are you saying there was a problem that happened to the cat because of the surgery, or something else happened down the road?
This is hypothetical.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I mean, whatever happens to it down the road, I don't think is that individual's fault or problem. And, you know, in the United States, we keep talking about how we like to sue each other, but the funny thing about that, because I am absolutely certain that there are more than a few of the cats that have gone through our S&R program that are owned by people. And in fact, at least on one occasion, somebody called us up and said, "Why is my cat missing part of its ear? You know, what's going on?" And then we explained to her, "Well, you just got a free spay, neuter, microchip, vaccination, everything else in the world, so be happy." But the reality is, in America, when you sue for something like that, you're suing for the value, right? The actual monetary value. And there is no real value in a mixed breed cat, frankly. There's no value in selling its kittens or things like that. So even if someone were to sue you, the costs involved just in filing the lawsuit would far exceed any reward you might get. But the individual who semi-owns the cat and returned it, and something happens to the cat later, is no more responsible for that than the owner themselves are responsible for that. The cat is out loose. You know, there's some risk level associated with a cat being outside loose. It's no one individual's fault, unless you can point to someone and say, yeah, that person walked up and beat that cat. Well, okay, that person is responsible for it. But if you return a cat and 3 days later it's crossing the street and gets run over by a car, that's not your fault. And typically when you look at abandonment or cruelty laws, like I mentioned before, they involve some element of willfulness, right? An intent to harm. You can't just, you know, because if it didn't, think about this. If your dog ever got out and got hit by a car, or your cat ever got out and got hit by a car, would you then be charged criminally with cruelty because your dog got out, even though it was a mistake, you didn't intend for the dog to get out? Of course you're not charged with that crime as an owner. And so why would a caretaker who happened to be the one who spayed and neutered it be any more responsible?
And I think that could happen in any situation anyway. Yeah. You know, I mean, our only defining thing is a microchip record. That's the one thing, isn't it? So, yeah, if they don't have a microchip, anyone could claim to be the owner. Yeah. Any more questions for our esteemed team?
Sorry, I think just part of the question was if the cat died under anaesthesia during the spay-neuter, whether you'd ever had anyone, you know, that actually owned the cat then come back at you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was trying to clarify. I wasn't sure what you were asking, but first of all, no, we haven't had that situation. But one of the things we do to ensure that that doesn't come back on the organization is, just like probably any of you that run a dissecting clinic, you know, the person who brings them in fills out some paperwork. And so one of the things we don't ask is, we don't say, if it's a, you know, because we have a separate application for feral or semi-owned kind of cats. We don't say, do you own the cat? We just say, we make them sign or initial a statement that says they have the authority to authorize this treatment. Yeah. And so whatever that issue may be, using that language becomes between that person and the owner if something goes wrong, right? Unless, of course, once again, there was negligence involved. If our veterinarian did something negligent and was responsible for that, they're going to, no matter what, we're responsible for that. But all other things being as they normally would, you know, you're making sure that that person is saying to you, I have the authority to say it's okay to give this medical attention to this animal.
Okay. Yes.
Following on from that, when you do microchip, you're over here, TNR, SNR animals, who do you put as the contact owner details on the microchip?
Yeah, so in our situation, I think I mentioned we have a partner, a non-profit partner. They're called Town Cats. So every cat is logged to them as a rescue. And so they're the ones that actually, once all the surgery and everything is done, they actually pick them up from the shelter and return them. So every single cat is outcome to them as a rescue.
Okay.
But just so you know, other people will just come up with a name.
Yeah.
Including it could just be return or something, or return to field, or the name of the program, and it's just registered to the name of the program, and usually we'll have whomever, like the shelter's phone number or whatever is who the microchip number gets to, okay, if you find them, this is who you're going to call.
Yeah. Yes.
John, my question is regarding about the finding pets and getting them back to their homes. Our organisation does that. The problem is the volume of, once the animals are found, maybe not from ourselves, but when they go back home, the owners, if they've put a lost report in, they don't contact us to let us know that they've been found. So the problem is we've got so much information of lost animals with probably not the correct information. So when we're doing our lost reports before, if they should have to be euthanized, we haven't got the right, like we could find 20 matches and those people have already actually got all their animals back. So do they come directly off the sites once they're rehomed, or how does that work?
Yeah, so this is part of that, and sorry I didn't touch on this, is part of the active management of that lost and found list is also reconnecting with the owner. So some of the statistics I was able to give you about of the cats that are found, where were they found? Remember I had those pie charts? That's based on mostly calling those people back and finding out, oh yeah, the cat came home. Great, we can take them off our list, and then they're ticking off, okay, the cat came home, or yeah, the neighbor called me with a flyer, like I would. If they called me, I'd say, yeah, a neighbor called with a flyer. Great, that goes into that category. So it involves the active management of that list, which is one of the reasons why it's a great volunteer activity, you know.
We do have a volunteer that does it, but again, it's one person every fortnight. And unfortunately, I mean, we've got animals that apparently lost from 10 years ago that we don't actually know whether they're...
Oh, yeah, I would cull that from time to time and, you know, come up with a time frame that's good for your organization, but probably a couple months worth before you just archive it or take it out, because you end up with years of stuff to look through. It's just too daunting to even mess with, yeah.
Okay. Can I just add something there, just from a previous experience that I had only a week ago, where I picked up someone's dog and took it in to the RSPCA and had it scanned and went through the whole process of trying to find its owner, and took the dog home with me because I didn't want to leave it at the shelter, so I didn't want it to get kennel cough, etc., etc. Anyway, I did find the dog's owner, and I got what I assume was an automated text message a day later saying, respond with these words, like you get from your hairdresser or your dentist or whatever, confirm that the animal's gone home, safely home. So I just sent a text message back saying safely home. So I just thought maybe you could set up some kind of automated
Isn't that good? That's
thing.
a terrific
Maybe
idea.
talk to the RSPCA because they
Yeah.
did it for me. So
Perfect, perfect. You need to speak to everybody. Now,
You should do what you do.
there are no more questions, so we'll break for afternoon tea. Will you put your hands together and thank our speakers?